and welcome to Focus KSA, another session in our ongoing series of video discussions with experts and analysts from across the world, really. This is a joint production of the Saudi-U.S. Trade Group and SUSRIS.com, the Saudi-U.S. Relations Project. I'm very excited today because we're examining the recent transition in Saudi Arabia on the passing of King Abdullah on January 23rd and the ascension of King Salman. This is really a landmark event in Saudi Arabia's history, and we have some very insightful folks to add some perspective today on this transition, not only on the transition, but the effects it has on leadership, policymaking, and relations with the United States. Let me first introduce my co-host, Patrick Ryan, who has published SUSRIS.com since 2003. Patrick and I will be joined today by two specialists on Gulf affairs, both of whom have been very, very active on providing commentary on the initial phase of the Saudi leadership transition, and they've been featured in numerous newspaper columns, cable news appearances, interviews, and articles, and they each have have been retweeted, I guess, at least 500,000 times. Let me first introduce Fahad Nazer, who's a terrorism analyst with JTG Inc., which is an analysis and intelligence company in Bethesda, Maryland. JTG has government and private clients, and including defense companies in the U.S. abroad. Fahad's a former political analyst at the Embassy of Saudi Arabia in Washington, and he's also a contributor to the book, The Kingdom, Saudi Arabia, and the Challenge of the 21st Century. Fahad is frequently interviewed, and in our daily, SUSTG's daily roundup, the review, it's very rare that we don't have an item that we either cite or feature where Fahad hasn't been quoted or hasn't been part of. Fahad tweets at F-A-Nazer. Fahad, welcome from Maryland, undisclosed location in Maryland. Glad you could be with us.
Thank you for having me.
And joining us from Dubai is Dr. Theodore Karasik, who's a senior advisor to risk and search management in Dubai, and also senior advisor with Gulf State Analytics. Dr. Karasik has been a regular guest both on Focus KSA and also in SUSRIS.com articles and interviews with Pat. He's a regular columnist with Al Arabiya and is cited in many media outlets in the Gulf. Ted tweets at T. Karasik. Welcome, Ted. Very glad you could join us from Dubai.
Thank you.
We've all agreed we won't share what we're actually wearing, but we're delighted to begin with this. And Patrick, let me turn it over to you to get started with the initial query.
Thank you, Richard and gentlemen, for joining us today on our Focus KSA panel. I'll remind our audience they can find full biographies for our guests and links to some of their many columns, articles, and interviews through a link at susris.com/FocusKSA, and you can also find the extensive Focus KSA archives with all the videos that have been produced in the project. You can also find a wealth of links in susris.com in a special section called Transition 2015. But let's get started. On December 31st, King Abdullah, the sixth monarch of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, was hospitalized in Riyadh with what was later said to be pneumonia. 23 days later, the royal court announced that the 90-year-old monarch had died. Within hours, it was announced that the Crown Prince, Salman bin Abdulaziz, had assumed the throne, and Deputy Crown Prince Mughran was named heir and Crown Prince. King Salman appointed Interior Minister Prince Mohammed bin Nayef as Deputy Crown Prince and Second Deputy Premier. Until Mohammed was named, only the sons of Saudi Arabian founder King Abdulaziz Al Saud had been in the line to succeed the monarch. This aspect of the transition, the name of a so-called next generation prince, will be among many of the items that we'll discuss today. Within days of King Salman's ascension, the royal family gathered to mourn and bury King Abdullah and to host leaders from around the world who went to Riyadh to share their condolences, including President Barack Obama and a contingent of current and former senior diplomatic and national security officials stretching back to the Reagan administration of the 1980s. On January 29th, King Salman announced a major restructuring to the Saudi government through several dozen royal decrees. The changes included replacements in the cabinet, disestablishment of a dozen councils and agencies, and the creation of new ones, and a shuffling of governors, royal court advisors, and other officials. A number of insightful articles on the changes, which we'll discuss today, are also available on susris.com/FocusKSA. Richard?
Thank you, Pat. With that background, let's dive into this. And Ted, if we can start with you. I know you're keenly interested in the details of the transition, the significance of the new generation, some of these decisions. Let's open it up to you if you'd like to start with your reaction on the passing of King Abdullah and what he meant with Saudi Arabia. But let's let you take it where you will. I know you have a lot to share on this.
Thank you very much. I'd like to start off by first saying that, yes, indeed, the transition went very smoothly. I think that's very good news. I think what caught all of us by surprise was really how quickly King Salman restructured the government of Saudi Arabia in order to bring about a better future for the kingdom. I think when we look at the promotions, particularly of Crown Prince Mughran in his current position, as well as the Deputy Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Naif, this shows stability for the long term. With the leadership, I think it's important to recognize the age of Prince Mughran, of course, and the age of Deputy Crown Prince Mohammed bin Naif. Richard, as you pointed out, along with some colleagues in a private conversation, that Prince Mughran may not become king for a while. And if he does become king, he'll be elderly, and we might have a bit of a problem in terms of generational change. And that might affect the way the kingdom is governed. Having said that, Mohammed bin Naif, as a crown prince or ultimately king, may not be in that position until 2030. That's 15 years from now. I don't think Saudi Arabia has 15 years to spare in terms of this generational change. So I'm optimistic that with the government reforms, that the young leaders of Saudi Arabia will be able to start making plans now for the transition that Saudi Arabia will have to go through from 2015 to 2025. When it comes to the structural changes, we saw 12 committees, if you will, within the Saudi government disappear and replaced by 2 committees. These 2 committees, or councils, if you will, are the Council of Political and Security Affairs, headed by Deputy Crown Prince Mohammed bin Naif, and then the Council of Economic and Development Affairs, headed by the Defense Minister, Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who's the son of the king. I think we should focus first on the Council of Political and Security Affairs because this council has to deal with its 9 members who are all from the Foreign and Security and Intelligence Services. They are going to be responsible for the kingdom's security both internally and externally, and they will be assisted by a secretariat and will have offices that help them in terms of their policy analysis. I think this shows a broadening of the scope of Saudi decision-making so that there are more inputs instead of a decision made by one individual because of their particular interests or files. This is an important step in Saudi policy making. On the other hand, we have the Council of Economic and Development Affairs with 22 members. This body encompasses all of Saudi domestic affairs, everything from health, labor, Islamic affairs, and so on. This is to be headed, as I mentioned, by the Defense Minister, Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who we have to watch very carefully because here is a 34-year-old prince. He's the son of a king. A lot of us knew about him and knew that he was behind his father, but when he was appointed to become the head of MOD, it took many of us by surprise that he would rise so quickly. This is an important point because his management capability has already been proven. He's known to be a very solid administrator, tough, and able to get things done. In the Council of Economic and Development Affairs, there's a lot to do in terms of where the kingdom is going to go, and primarily that is in the education realm. We saw the Ministry of Higher Education merged with the Ministry of Education, and these, now you have a Ministry of Education, a super ministry, if you will, that is going to have an immediate task in front of it. And we've already seen this in the Saudi press, that the ministry will be devising new ways to make sure that the youth of Saudi Arabia are being instructed appropriately in terms of knowledge transfer and knowledge management, as well as the creation of future leaders, and that there are jobs for these graduates in the kingdom, and to also make sure that graduates stay in the kingdom to avoid a Saudi brain drain, which seemed to have been occurring under the former king, with students going abroad to study and staying in outside the kingdom. Overall, I think that these are positive developments. We have to give some time for these two councils to work, but it seems that King Salman has come in with a real bang, and I think that that's an important development in Saudi Arabia at this juncture.
Thank you, Ted, for those insights on what we've seen happening in the transition so far. That's a great perspective on the future courses of action, especially the readout on the new councils, the Council of Political and Security Affairs and the Council of Economic and Development Affairs. I'm sure we're going to see both of those play a very central role in the course ahead. We now turn to Fahad Nazer, who will, I would like to thank for his many timely tweets that alerted many of the specialists and colleagues early on about King Abdullah's condition on the night he passed away. Fahad, we're looking forward to your remarks about the implication of King Salman's assumption of leadership in Saudi Arabia. And I know you want to start to talk about the key foreign policy challenges that Riyadh faces. But if you could please maybe just give us your impressions of the passing of King Abdullah. What was your reaction to the news?
Well, thank you for having me, Pat and Richard. It's always a pleasure to be with you guys and with Ted as well, obviously. Well, initially, I think I speak on, for many Saudis when I say that my initial reaction was sadness, really, because the king had been a fixture in Saudi politics for a very long time. As everybody knows, he had been de facto king since 1995. So at some point, especially in the past 4 or 5 years, which have been very turbulent, I think his mere presence was reassuring to many people. There are many consider that again, his leadership was crucial for overcoming many difficult junctures in Saudi history, going back to the September 11th attacks on the U.S., which were soon followed by terrorist attacks inside the kingdom in 2003. And I think that his presence was very reassuring to Saudis as well as to people in the wider international community. I think he made it a priority of his to stand up to the serious threat from Al-Qaeda and other Islamist militant organizations. And during the events that came to be known as the Arab Spring, I think for Saudis, his presence and resolute policies, I think, proved to be crucial because, as one long-term regime after another fell, I think it was natural for Saudis. Obviously, Saudis were paying very close attention. And again, I think his mere presence there was reassuring to many of them. Having said that, obviously the king was in his early 90s, and his health had been deteriorating for quite a while. So it wasn't a surprise that he had passed, but it was, I think it was a very surreal experience for me, again, as a Saudi, to watch people reacting. I was in the U.S. when the king passed. I was in Saudi Arabia, but I did for the first time observe how Saudis reacted to the passing of a monarch on social media. That was obviously, in 2005 when King Fahd died. I barely had I had a computer, but certainly didn't have Twitter, and social media was not anything as what it is now. So it was an interesting experience to watch the outpouring of emotion coming on social media. Um, you know, hundreds of, if not thousands, certainly the ones that I came across. I can certainly say that hundreds of Saudis expressed their sympathies, their sadness as the news broke. That's how I found out was online. Um, and so that by itself was an unusual experience and a sign of the times, so to speak. Now, having said that, and then as Ted already mentioned, I think the Saudi leadership uh, was keen on stressing that that they had taken steps and precautions or measures to make sure that the transition would be as smooth as possible, and that's why the assumption of King Salman and then the appointment of Crown Prince Mohammed were announced almost at the same time as the king's passing. Um, Within mere hours, King Salman delivered a brief but still not an insignificant speech. And I think if there's one theme that he emphasized there, it was continuity, at least during that speech. And I think that was important because, we all know that for many months, if not years, there's been much speculation in the Western press primarily, but also some in the Arab press as well, about what will happen once King Abdullah passes. And we've all seen the articles about an impending or looming succession struggle. I think the Saudi leadership wanted to kind of put an end to that debate very quickly, and they did that. I think, and initially, I think again it was meant to reassure Saudis as well as the wider international community. Um, Now, moving forward, I mean, the region, I can't really think of another period in recent memory where the region has been in as much turmoil as it is now. Um, I think King Salman faces many, many challenges, daunting challenges in the region, and he doesn't have that much time to mull things over. I think, perhaps, and I wrote about this recently, I think Yemen, just due to its proximity, might be the number one priority. Saudi Arabia has a long history of a very close involvement in Yemeni politics. I think the Saudis, and perhaps understandably so, again, due to a long history of civil and political turmoil in Yemen, which has gone, multiple civil wars. The Saudis have argued that they need, at the very least, they need to make sure that the violence does not spill over into their territory as has happened in the past. So I think a lot of people are watching closely what King Salman is going to do about the Houthi takeover in Yemen. I don't think that the Saudi options are somewhat limited, as anyone who's followed Yemeni politics over the years understands. Alignments have a very odd way of changing very quickly and fluidly in Yemen. They change almost, these days it seems, almost day to day. And the Saudis have to navigate these waters very carefully. I think the Houthi presence and takeover has clearly worried them. Of course, the wider issue there is, and although there's disagreement as to the level of support that Iran is providing the Houthis, if you pick up a Saudi newspaper, I think that to a large extent, the Houthi takeover is seen as yet one manifestation of an Iranian encroachment um, on the Gulf, on Saudi Arabia's backyard, so to speak. And I think that really adds an urgency to the problems and the turmoil in Yemen. It'll be interesting to see how the kingdom moves forward there. Just in terms of U.S.-Saudi relations, as I think Ted aptly described it when the president cut his India trip short and went to Saudi Arabia to pay respects to the new king. He took with him what Ted rightly called an American political royalty. I mean, it wasn't just senior people from from the current administration, as well as senior Republican leaders, but there were people from previous administrations, both Republican and Democratic. I mean, people like Condoleezza Rice and James Baker, Sandy Berger. I'm not sure that I've quite seen that in quite a while. It was kind of a who's who in American politics went to Saudi Arabia to pay respects to the late king, but also as much as it was also seemed like a concerted effort on the part of the president to perhaps turn a new page with Saudi Arabia. I think that it's fairly well documented that the past 4 or 5 years, again since the Arab Spring, have put quite a bit of strain on Saudi-U.S. relations. I think beginning with Egypt and the turmoil in Egypt and the overthrow of President Mubarak. It's by all accounts the Saudis were rather disappointed, upset over that. President Mubarak was one of their closest, most reliable allies for many years. And the perception in not just in Saudi Arabia, but I think the wider Gulf perhaps, and also the wider region, is that the U.S. Should have done more to preserve President Mubarak's regime. That's debatable, but certainly the Saudis were very disappointed to see him go. Then there's the issue of Syria. I think going forward, and of course the Saudis have been fairly vocal in their support of the U.S. strikes against ISIS strongholds in Syria and are taking part in that and have been very public about their involvement. But I think going forward, at some point, the Saudis and Americans have to perhaps come to I think they have to clarify where their positions on the future of Syria and the future of the Assad regime specifically. I get the sense that there might be a bit of a disconnect there. The Saudis have invested so much political capital into their support of the opposition that it would be very, very difficult for them to turn a new chapter with Assad, as some in the West seem to be suggesting. It's not entirely clear to me where the administration stands in terms of the future of Assad. Are they ready to, are they heeding that advice and considering him the lesser of two evils? Or are they still committed to his removal or ouster? Or that's not entirely clear. I think that's going to have to be flushed out at some point. Just one last note. I think Saudi-Egyptian relations over the past few days have really come under a microscope. We've probably all seen some of the stories related to a supposed leak that had Egyptian President Sisi speaking in less than glowing terms about Saudi leaders. Some people are doubting the authenticity of the video, of the audio. Be that as it may, I think that there's a lot in the Saudi media as well as the wider Arab media about where do Saudi-Egyptian relations go moving forward. There are some who are suggesting, and this is, I think, instructive, and it reminds me of 2005 when King Abdullah took over. There was a perception that King Abdullah would be perhaps a little less friendly to the West, might be a bit more amenable to strengthening his relations with Arab countries. So there's a bit in the Arab media about a supposed maybe a change in the position of Saudi Arabia vis-a-vis the Muslim Brotherhood. I'm not sure that that's the case right now, but that obviously will affect and impact Saudi-Egyptian relations going forward. So, to make the long story short, I think the King Salman has a lot on his plate, beginning with Yemen, and then it doesn't get any easier from there.
Thank you, Fahad. Um, that overview, I think, reflects the extraordinary scope of issues locally, geographically, globally that Saudi Arabia is involved in. And I think if we don't narrow the scope a little bit, we can talk for hours. Let me follow up a little bit on your comment with your observations with regard to King Abdullah. Exactly, and obviously I'm not Saudi, but I'm conversant enough with Saudi Arabia and watching for long enough to understand that King Abdullah was especially highly regarded individual. He was revered by Saudis in many ways, and I guess you might say in the pantheon of Saudi kings, in terms of affection, he might rank up there with King Faisal. To affirm exactly what you're saying, this was a tremendous loss, and there was a great deal of sadness, which makes it even more striking the pace and the breadth of King Salman's changes. And what I'm interested in getting at, and maybe we can do this work from the inside out, and we'll start with the Al Saud enterprise. The governing family in Saudi Arabia has just gone through an extraordinary transition, and depending on how you look at it, it could be the two of Abdullah's sons were removed from very influential governorships in Mecca and Riyadh mayoral positions. A whole slew of younger folks were brought in, technocrats, significant administrative reorganization. Fahad, initially, and I'd be interested in your thoughts too, Ted, in terms of that Saudi enterprise, the governing enterprise, what does this mean? Everyone wants to know what the succession issues are, and we understand that that can be very hazy and that sort of thing, but clearly there was a transition here. Clearly King Salman had thought this through, had this in order, implemented it more quickly and with a greater pace than anything anybody could have guessed. And I'm interested in the ramifications going forward. And Fahad, let me start with you. How do Saudis perceive this transition in terms of the Al Sauds and in terms of their government?
Yeah, well, I mean, just going back to the theme of continuity, I mean, I certainly agree that the appointment of especially Prince Mohammed bin Salman and giving him such a high profile and immense responsibilities does mark a significant change. But what's interesting is that King Salman also retained the long-serving Saudi foreign minister, Prince Saud al-Faisal. He also retained Minister Ali Naimi as Minister of Petroleum, and those are arguably two of the main foreign policy positions. Or so, there are some who think that this was not done by accident, and it was meant to convey again a sense of continuity, and at least initially, to the wider international community, that Saudi Arabia was not likely to make any dramatic changes in terms of its overall foreign policy, in terms of its oil policy, at least not in the short term. And I think that that is the case so far. We haven't seen anything dramatic. In fact, everything that has come, from official channels as well as Saudi media, is emphasizing that don't expect anything dramatic, at least in the short run. And again, considering the age of Minister Naimi, and there have been many stories about him possibly expressing an interest in retirement. If I'm not mistaken, he's close to 80 years old at this point. Prince Saud al-Faisal has served as foreign minister since 1975, and he's had some health issues over the past recent years. But the King Salman's retention of those two gentlemen, I think, again, seems to, in the minds of some, seems to lend credence to the idea that in the realm of foreign policy, that the Saudi leadership is keen on conveying this sense that there's continuity. People shouldn't expect 180-degree turns in foreign policy. But again, like Ted said, the appointment of Prince Mohammed bin Salman did take a lot of people by surprise. I think his youth and his age varies. I've heard, I think officially he's supposed to be 34. Others think he's as young as 28. To trust him with that much responsibility, I think is something that people are going to watch very closely. But as Ted said, the appointment of Prince Mohammed bin Naif, on the other hand, was a little less controversial. He's got significantly more experience. He's older, by most accounts. He's giving credit to what has been largely a successful counterterrorism effort, Saudi efforts against Al-Qaeda inside Saudi Arabia, and I think the Prince Mohammed is given a lot of credit and to that. Now, the fact that he was named as Deputy Crown Prince, again, I was surprised certainly at how quickly this was done. Again, not to sound like a broken record here, but for many years people expected this to be expected a struggle of some sort, expected this decision to be a momentous decision in the history of the kingdom, and it was, but it just did not. The way it shaped out, it happened, within a week of King Salman taking over. And like you said, Richard, obviously the king did not think this. It seems like he had thought this through for quite a while. Something tells me he didn't think that in 7 days, but he had been giving this a lot of thought over most likely many weeks, if not months. And I think it'll be interesting moving forward. I think that given just the uncertainty in the region, the turmoil in the region, I mean, you have more than a handful of states that are on the verge of becoming failed states, beginning with Syria, Libya. Iraq has some serious security issues. Yemen is, again, kind of in flux, and there's a sense that nobody's really in charge in Yemen. And so that fact, I think, makes it incredibly difficult for the Saudis to say, well, we're just going to maintain the status quo and we're not going to change it. They're going to have to change their policies and react because the region is in such great turmoil. So we will see some changes, but what I'm not sure about is, again, the kingdom's policies towards the Muslim Brotherhood. I think under King Abdullah, especially the last year or so, the position on the Brotherhood was very clear. I think if you picked up a Saudi newspaper or you turned on Saudi television, Saudi commentators almost did not make a distinction between the Brotherhood and ISIS. I mean, they kind of lumped them all in the same category. So whether the kingdom softens its position on vis-a-vis the Brotherhood or changes it or modifies it will be interesting to watch, and obviously that will have serious implications on its relations with Egypt going forward as well.
Thank you, Fahad. Ted, I know you're chomping at the bit. So if you could pick up on that original theme and share with us your insights with regard to the transition and Al Saud enterprise.
Well, to me, the Al Saud enterprise is about the Sudari faction within the Al Saud family that has quickly come back to power, if you will. To me, someone who's studied Saudi Arabia for 30 years, been to the kingdom, interacted with a lot of people, live in the region, I think it's pretty clear that what happened during the transition was that there wasn't one, so to speak. It was the sun went down and the sun came back up the next day, and it was situation as usual, but with a different king who seems to me to have this real plan, as Fahad has mentioned, that this was months in the making. and that the Sudari group, or clan as some people call it, has seized back control of the agenda, not only domestically in the kingdom, but in terms of its foreign policy. I think that's one of the reasons why you see the foreign minister and the oil minister still in the places that they are today. They are affiliated with the Sudari group in the kingdom. Having said that, I think the Sudaris also recognize the point that they need to move to the next generation and keep the kingdom and its leadership within the Sudari ranks, which is why Mohammed bin Nayef was appointed to his post so quickly, which guarantees that the that the Sudaris will continue in their management of the kingdom and its assets. In addition to that, with Mohammed bin Salman in his position at MOD, he is a CEO of all defense matters, including arms purchases and procurement, as well as how the future of the kingdom's defense policies will move forward. So this all has a Sudari ring to it. And I think also when we look at the new governors, that they're also Sudari affiliates. So this move to the Sudaris, I think, is important because of their outlook in the region. I think that what Fahad is talking about, the foreign policy challenges that we see in the region and beyond for Saudi foreign policy, that it's going to have a Sudari flavor to it. That means that we may see some hardening on some key issues. And it also means at the same time that we're going to see press agencies that have a beef, if you will, with the Sudaris and coming out with statements like we saw regarding the kingdom's relationship with the Brotherhood and whether or not it will still be considered terrorist or not. My reading of all of this material is that it's coming from pro-Brotherhood sources in order to create an information war, for lack of better words, over where the kingdom's going to go. I don't think that we should jump so quickly to read everything that's coming from certain sources, because there seems to be certain groups out there, whether they're in the Middle East or in Europe or in the States, so on, that want to pick on the new leadership in the kingdom and to expose it in certain ways in order to exploit specific political issues, for example, 9/11 and Saudi involvement in this, or the P5+1 process, what's going on with Iran, and as I said a moment ago, about the Brotherhood. So we have to be very careful what we're reading because of this perception that the Sudaris have control of it for the foreseeable future.
Richard, we're blowing through our time here. Do you have a couple of questions before we get to closing remarks?
I do. I tend to think, with regard to Saudi Arabia's regional challenges, its global relationships, that's handled at a very high level with a fairly small universe of people weighing in. So, you know, Syria, I think, in tandem, obviously, with the United States, UAE, Jordan, Egypt, Turkey, and others, they'll address that. I think they probably have a sense of what might happen with the negotiations with Iran on the nuclear issue. I don't think anybody really knows what they're going to do with Yemen just yet in Saudi Arabia, and that, you know, you could expand that to the rest of the world. You know, I'm president of Saudi-U.S. Trade Group, Saudi-U.S. Trade. I'm particularly interested in, you know, and I think a lot of our readers are particularly interested in Saudi Inc. How Saudi Arabia managing its internal affairs, and for that reason, I'd love to get both of you, maybe start with Ted, to expand on the Council for Economic and Development Affairs. Now, this is they rolled up a number of committees and that sort of thing into this. Is 22 members. As it was mentioned earlier, they have a large focus on education. In terms of across the board, educational reform, Saudi Arabia's future. Does this new format, this new body, move Saudi Arabia farther down the road in making real progress in these areas? And Ted, if you have some insights on that, that'd be great. And then Fahad, if you can follow.
I think that the reform effort in Saudi is really going to start to take off with this reorganization and set goals, real goals for Saudi institutions to measure how they are succeeding in translating the Saudi society to become more advanced and to have more highly specialized fields in a century where we're seeing technological leaps and bounds. And it's about keeping the kingdom with its conservative roots, but allowing this prosperous growth to start and rise up higher. And it's about diversifying the economy into different arenas. I think under King Abdullah, we did see the formation, or talking about rather, and the formation of the 6 economic cities, which I think was a first step, if you will, for the kingdom to move forward in terms of its development and for the future. That kind of went to the side a bit because of problems in ministries and people not following through. Civil servants tend to, in large bureaucracies, no matter which country it is, tend to just sit on papers. I think now under King Salman there seems to be a greater push for this kind of development. And I think for Saudi Inc. and for folks wanting to invest in Saudi Arabia in the future of the kingdom, I think now is a real good time not to be nervous, but actually to be more forthcoming in their plans to invest in the kingdom. The security situation may seem a little unstable. Maybe that's too strong of a word, but that's going to get under control because of the desire for the kingdom to attract new investments. So I would give it a positive outlook, although we do not talk about oil here. So, but overall, I think that's I think the plans are there. I think the follow through is there too now, unlike it was maybe a few years ago. So that's good news.
Fahad, did you want to follow on that at all?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you know, I follow Saudi media fairly closely, and you know, not a day goes by where I don't come across at least one item in the paper that speaks about the need for more accountability from government, more efficiency. There's a fairly wide discussion about perceived corruption in government, underperformance. So I think the restructuring that Ted spoke about is an attempt to address some of these issues. You know, there's a perception that this is an attempt to a Saudi friend of mine described it as streamlining of government performance, and it's also consistent with the emphasis that the Saudi leadership has put on developing human capital, as it's called. The Saudis, I think, are well aware that they have a predominantly young population. Much of the budget year to year, the bulk of the budget is spent on education, housing, and healthcare. That has been the pattern for many years. On job creation, we've all seen the media reports about the attempt of the the Saudi leadership again to replace some of the estimated 8 million expatriates working in Saudi Arabia with Saudis. Again, by most estimates, the private sector is perhaps 90% foreign, and obviously that's a serious problem. You have hundreds of thousands joining the workforce every year, Saudi men and women, and so that had to change. And so in some ways, I think that might be, right at the top of their list of priorities is finding employment for this new generation of Saudis, and diversifying their economy. That's been an ongoing project for many years. This is not a recent thing, but they still have a lot of daunting challenges ahead, obviously.
Our next Focus KSA session will be a discussion with Sharif Atta, who is the founder and manager of SQM Investments. And this is an investment. It manages funds that invest in Saudi Arabia. The discussion will be on the potential opening, proposed opening, the planned opening of the Saudi stock market this year. And the expansion of these capital markets, again, is part of the larger economic strategy to diversify, get foreign investment, get best practices, really improve the whole operational environment, regulatory and otherwise, in Saudi Arabia. So I'm encouraged by your responses. I think it's an important step. And Fahad, you're right. I don't think there's any more important agenda item than exactly that. That's employing, more Saudis. Go ahead, Pat. Thank you.
Well, I just wanted to say we're coming close to the end of our time here for Focus KSA today. We've had a great discussion of the issues surrounding the transition in Riyadh and the implications for the kingdom and its relationship with the United States going forward. And I'm sure that we'll have much more material from Dr. Karasik and Mr. Nazer on SUSRIS.com and on the SUSTG.com website and in the news review, along with other material as we all continue to watch and assess the developments related to the transition in the kingdom and the relationship going forward. I'd like to ask our distinguished panelists to provide any closing remarks that they'd like to make. Fahad, would you like to summarize what these issues and events have meant from your perspective?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the only thing that's clear at this point is that King Salman has a very full plate ahead of him, certainly in the foreign policy realm. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, just about every there's a handful of countries around the region are borderline failed states. Even within the GCC, there's some issues that need to be sorted out. Nobody's mentioned Saudi-Qatari relations here, I don't think, but they've obviously, that bilateral relationship has come under strain for many years. It was there's a perception that King Abdullah was able to turn a new page with the new young Emir Tamim. Now, going back to a point I mentioned earlier about the effect that the mere presence of King Abdullah had, at least there was a perception that his mere presence was able to overcome and transcend so many of these issues. And since his passing, there's certainly not everybody, who think that some of these relationships are already beginning to show cracks. Saudi-Qatari relationships, in the eyes of some, are beginning to show their old cracks. Again, some of the old issues between the two countries are coming back to the surface. I've already mentioned Saudi-Egyptian relations, Saudi-Yemeni relations, and the challenge ahead. Although King Abdullah, and frankly, in fairness to King Salman, I think Yemen is going to be a perplexing problem, not just for Saudi Arabia, but it seems to be for the wider international community as a whole. A couple of years ago, the UN envoy was raving about how Yemen was I think his words were, the only Arab country moving towards a peaceful transition. unfortunately, that has not panned out, and there's serious problems there. So King Salman has serious, challenges ahead of him. But I think he's, as I mentioned, he's surrounded by very competent senior advisors. Certainly, Prince Saud Al Faisal has decades of experience in foreign policy, and then you have Prince Mohammed bin Naif as well. He brings his rather lengthy experience, and so does Prince Mugrin. So I think they have some daunting challenges ahead, and it'll be interesting to see how quickly they start to react. And I still think that Yemen might be the first area where we see some serious moves or by the Saudi government to address some of these problems.
I think Fahad brought up again a point where we could talk about something for several hours or another episode of this program, which is some of the other countries and what's happening in the rest of the region. Fahad did bring up the Qatar issue. There is also other issues that are brewing out there. So my final comment would be that we need to look very carefully at the regional security landscape and how that will be changing over the year and how it may or may not influence what happens within the kingdom itself. Yes, so there's a new king, good team, young, inspiring, visionary, if you will. Yet at the same time, you have the kingdom surrounded by trouble. And that trouble sometimes leaks into the kingdom, as we see sometimes in the eastern province or in the south. We've had Daesh try to come into the northern part of the kingdom. We seem to be turning a page in the region now with Daesh and Jordan. How will this affect the kingdom and its security? We have the P5+1 process, and we also have what Fahad pointed out about Yemen and about southern Yemen versus northern Yemen. ACAP is there. Daesh is beginning to get a foothold in Yemen. What does that mean for security in the southern part of the kingdom? We have the oil issue, how long the prices are going to remain low, how long can Saudi Arabia maintain what it's doing. We have other issues ongoing in North Africa with Libya and sides being taken, Egypt, and what's happening with al-Sisi, and as Fahad brought up about these leaks. We also have Saudi policy towards East Asia or to Russia. How is that going to change vis-a-vis Syria or Iraq or any other countries where you can make a pivot between the two? King Salman and company have a lot to look forward to in this coming year and following years in terms of the international security environment and how that directly relates to how they conduct their internal security, but also how people perceive the security of the kingdom for investment and economic growth as the Saudis launch this stock market with foreign investors and how they move forward based on other models that you find in the region, particularly, I think, in the UAE.
And Fahad, this could go on forever. And personally, I'd enjoy that. I'd learn a lot. But we'll try and cap it here. Pat, and I know on behalf of Pat and SUSRIS and the Saudi U.S. Trade Group, thanks so much for joining us again. We rely heavily on your insights. This is an extraordinary moment in Saudi Arabian history and in the U.S.-Saudi relationship. And we really appreciate your perspectives and your commentary and analysis. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.